A hormone is a chemical that is secreted by glands in the endocrine system. And unlike neurotransmitters, it is directly released in the bloodstream. In our last chapter, when we were doing neurotransmitters, we learned that how neurotransmitters as chemicals are released by the axons from one neuron to the other neuron. It is released by the axons and then it is received by the terminals of dendrites. So this is how these chemicals are being transferred from one neuron to the other neuron. But hormones are not like neurotransmitters. They do not pass on from neuron to neuron, but these are secreted by the glands in the endocrine system and directly released into the bloodstream. Now here is the difference. So epinephrine, that is adrenaline, is released by the adrenal gland into the bloodstream as a hormone. Whereas norepinephrine, noradrenaline, is released by neurons in the brain as a neurotransmitter. So it is the same chemical, but in the brain it is released as neurotransmitter, and by the glands in the body it is released as a hormone. Another difference between neurotransmitter and hormone is that neurotransmitters are released in the brain, the chemicals, and it brings very sudden change. But whereas the hormones, they are released in the blood. Because they are released in the blood, the changes that are brought in, it takes time. So it takes time to bring in changes in the body. And also when hormones are released as chemicals in the bloodstream, though it takes time to bring in the change, but at the same time it lasts longer than the neurotransmitters. So whatever the changes are being brought in the body by the hormones, it lasts longer in the body. So neurotransmitters are traveled through the nerve cells, whereas hormones are traveled through the blood to the cells of the body. So this clearly implies that there is a limitation to neurotransmitters because nervous system might not reach every single place in the body. So there is a limitation on the neurotransmitters where all it is going. But when it comes to hormones, hormones can reach even those places where neurotransmitters cannot reach, because hormones are being traveled by blood, and blood is there being supplied to every single cell of the body. So hormones can reach the body places, different places of bodies or organs or cells of the body more and faster than neurotransmitters. So our nervous system processes more rapid movements that are there, rapid processes that are there, that your movement, your thinking, your decision, for all these things, for our thinking, decision and our movement, we need a quick response, we need a quick action. So these are regulated by the neurotransmitters, by the nervous system. Whereas hormones regulate your ongoing long-lasting processes like your digestion, your production, your growth, your metabolism. Now your movement, thinking and decision is something that is happening very quickly. So these are done by the neurotransmitters. But when we talk about growth, it takes a while. It is an ongoing process. It's a longer period process. Your metabolism, your digestion, your production, these happen over a period of time and not very quickly. So that means these are regulated much faster, and these are regulated by our hormones. Next is the degree of voluntary control. Now when we talk about neurotransmitters, it is as compare easier to regulate or control these processes. We can control our emotions, our feelings, our thinking, our decision making. So what happens is the process of neurotransmitter, the releasing of the chemicals of neurotransmitters, that to some extent can be controlled, not completely. We cannot actually directly control our neurotransmitters or chemicals that are being released by our nervous system. We cannot do that, but to some extent we do have some mental control over it. But when we talk about our hormones, we have very less control. We do not have control over our growth, our metabolism. Even if we want to, we do not have any voluntary control over the hormones. So these are two different systems, nervous system and endocrine system. These are two separate systems that are working in our body. But these two systems can also be interdependent. So they kind of influence each other over a period of time. So these two systems influence each other, and there are some chemicals that work as neurotransmitters as well as the hormones in our body. For example, adrenaline released by endocrine glands are adrenal glands, hypothalamus, pineal gland, pituitary gland, thyroid, parathyroid, thymus, pancreas, testes, ovaries. So together these form the endocrine system. Now there are so many hormones, rushing through the blood in our body. Now every hormone is not going to influence every single cell or every single receptor of the cell in our body. Obviously it is there in our blood. All the hormones are everywhere in the blood, but it only influences those particular cells which have the receptors for these hormones. So for example, let's say this is just an example for if there are certain cells that have a receptor like this and a hormone is coming, so maybe this hormone is not apt for this particular cell, so it will not influence this. But if a hormone is coming and it fits well into this receptor, this is being received by this particular hormone, this cell has those specific receptors that are apt for this particular hormone, then it is going to affect those cells. So that those cells that are affected, or those cells that have particular receptors for specific hormones, are called as target cells. When a hormone binds with the receptor of a cell, it brings in a lot of changes. These changes are called as genomic. Now genomic means either it can activate a particular gene or it can suppress the gene. So gene activation or gene suppression, either of the things can take place. So this essentially means that hormones do not direct the behavior directly. It does not change the behavior directly. Our hormones do have an effect on our behavior, but it is indirectly. The hormone is not going to change your behavior directly. As soon as the hormone is released, your behavior starts to change. It does not happen like that. It just builds up that kind of a scenario, it builds up that kind of a situation for you where a particular behavior is being expressed. So it brings in indirect. Let's study some important hormones. The first is adrenaline. So what is the role of this? It is secreted by adrenal glands and it is responsible for the arousal, the fight and flight response. It plays a role in emotional memory formation. Next is cortisol. Cortisol is secreted by the adrenal glands. It helps control blood sugar levels, regulate metabolism, reduces inflammation and assist with memory formation. Third is melatonin, secreted by the pineal gland, signals the relaxation and lower body temperature that help with a night of restful sleep. Then we have neuropeptide, produced by the hypothalamus, acts as a neurotransmitter in the brain, stimulates food intake, reduces anxiety and stress, reduces pain perception. Higher levels of NPY appear to be linked to higher level of resilience. Oxytocin, produced by the hypothalamus and secreted by the pituitary gland. When it affects the brain, it acts as a neurotransmitter, plays a role in mother-child attachment, believed to play a role in social bonding and trust between people. Testosterone, produced by the testes, plays a facilitative role in aggressive behavior, that is, it doesn't cause aggression, but high levels of testosterone result in high levels of aggression. So now we are done with the basics of hormones. What are hormones? How is it secreted? With what kind of hormones are there? So for your IB psychology students, we'll be doing only 2 hormones in detail and supporting studies for the same. So the very first hormone that we are going to do today is oxytocin. Oxytocin is produced by hypothalamus and it is released in the bloodstream by pituitary glands. It plays a huge role in your social bonding, in your reproduction, in your cuddling, childbirth, social bonding. It is basically the love hormone, the cuddle hormone, the kiss hormone, hug hormone. So it is basically everything related to love. So basically when a person is loving someone or is in love, or during the childbirth, or when you are hugging someone, when you're kissing someone, when you're cuddling someone, any kind of nice, pleasurable, lovable feeling that you're having, that means oxytocin is being released in your body. Oxytocin is also released by the stimulation of nipples of a mother when a newborn child tries to breastfeed. That is the time when oxytocin is released, and when the oxytocin is released during that time, it creates the bonding between the mother and the child. It is a natural hormone that manages key aspects of the female and male reproductive systems, including labor, delivery, lactation, as well as aspects of human behavior. So your hypothalamus makes the oxytocin, but your posterior pituitary gland stores and releases it into your bloodstream. The two main functions, physical functions of oxytocin are to stimulate uterine contractions in labor and childbirth, and to stimulate contractions of breast tissue to aid in lactation and childbirth. So oxytocin also acts as a chemical messenger in your brain and has an important role in many human behavior and social interactions. So whenever there is any kind of sexual arousal or recognition is there of a known one, or trust building is happening, any kind of romantic attachment is there, or parent and infant bonding is there, that is the time when oxytocin is being released in your brain. And it is also possible that oxytocin's possible relationship enhancing effects are trust, gazing, empathy, positive relationship memories, fidelity, positive communication, processing of bonding cues. Oxytocin has a positive impact on social behaviors that is related to your relaxation, trust, and psychological stability. It is also known that this hormone has been shown to decrease the stress and anxiety levels when released into certain parts of the brain. Maybe that is why, when a child is stressed, or when our spouse or our loved one is under a lot of stress and they're not feeling comfortable, they're not feeling very great or good that day, if you go and hug them or cuddle them or just give them a kiss, it releases that oxytocin in their bodies, and due to which whatever the stress level is, it usually comes down. So that is the role of oxytocin. It's a beautiful hormone after all. So let's study what is the link between oxytocin and fidelity. Now, why we are doing this? Because I'm going to give you a supporting study for the same. So because you have to write a supporting study, you also need to write the concept before the study. So we are going to do the link between oxytocin and fidelity. So basically, when a person has oxytocin levels high in their body, they are likely to see their partner more attractive than other opposite sex, but at the same time their level of interest decreases towards the stranger attractive person. So for example, some opposite gender or any gender attractive person comes in, so if their oxytocin level is high, they're likely to feel more attractive, or they're likely to feel their partner more attractive, but they are not going to feel more that kind of an attraction towards an attractive stranger, or they will not feel that kind of connection. So that kind of attractiveness lowers when attractive stranger steps in. Works on reward loop. So reward loop means that when a person is being loyal, is into fidelity, they are being truthful to their own partner, it in turn brings in reward to that person, a kind of an achievement to that person. And when that reward comes in, it further motivates the person or influences the person to get into more of loyalty and infidelity. So this is a loophole that keeps on revolving from behavior to their fidelity, and from fidelity to the behavior. Encourages bonding, but at the same time the slight disadvantages, it can also lead to prejudice and favoritism, which can further lead to in groups and out groups. So there is a slight disadvantage of oxytocin. Now let's do one supporting study that you have to write in your exams, either for a 9 marker or a 22 marker. So this is for the IB psychology students. Okay, so this study is about the role of oxytocin in interpersonal trust. Now, this study was given by Kosfeld et al. 2005, where he claimed that oxytocin increases trust in humans. The participants were 128 healthy male students. Mean age was 22 years. The subjects were randomly allocated either to the oxytocin group, that is the experimental group, or placebo group, that is the control group. So substances were administered via an intranasal spray. So through intranasal, the spray of oxytocin was given to them. So the purpose of the experiment, the researchers designed a trust game with real monetary stakes. In this game, subjects were paired anonymously and played the role of either an investor or a trustee. In game theory, this game is known as investor. Each round of the game, each with a new partner, consists of 3 steps. So you can here see in the diagram up there is an investor, and then transfer is 0 in the digits of 0, 4, 8 and 12. There are further 4 trustees. Let's understand how it works. So in the step 1, the experimenter gives both the investor and a trustee an endowment of 12 monetary units. Now in the next step, the investor needs to decide how much of that to send to the trustee. Either they can send none, that is 0, or they can send 4, 8 or 12, all of it. So the experimenter triples whatever is sent to the trustee. If the investor sends 4 units, the trustee receives 12. If the investor sends 12 units, the trustee receives 36 and so on. So remember that the trustees have their own endowment which is added to their total. So for example, if the investor sends 8, the trustee receives 24, and so has 24 plus 12 is 36 monetary units. Now the third step was that the trustee decides how much of the now available money to send back to the investor. The idea is that if I am the investor and I completely trust you, the trustee. So investor, if they trust their trustee, I will send you 12 monetary units. It will turn into 36. And I trust that you will send me back at least 18 and maybe more. So can I trust you though? We only interact once during this experiment. So you have a temptation of keeping the whole sum with you. In order to trust you, I need to overcome aversion towards this risk. So participants played the game 4 times in the same role, each time paired randomly with a new partner. At the end of the experiment, the total earned monetary units were exchanged for real money. Okay, so let's see what were the result of this study. The results of the experiment showed that the level of trust in those participants who received a dose of oxytocin was much higher than in the control group. The median transfer of investors was 10 in oxytocin group and 8 in the control group. 45% of subjects in the oxytocin group showed maximum trust level, that is 12 monetary units, whereas only 21% in the placebo group showed the maximum trust level. The authors suggested 2 alternative explanations for this finding. So the first is, this is important, you need to understand all the students there. The first is that oxytocin reduces risk aversion in general, and oxytocin increases people's trust in other humans. So in order to clarify, they designed a follow-up study in which an independent group of subjects played a similar trust game, but this time against a random mechanism software. The algorithm in the software was modeled after decisions of real people in the previous experiment. So the investors faced exactly the same risk as in the human experiment, only that this time they knew they were playing against machines. So no difference was observed in this experiment between the oxytocin and the placebo group. The median transfer was 8 monetary units in both conditions. The researchers concluded that oxytocin specifically affects trust in interpersonal interactions. So when we are talking about oxytocin is being released in our body, it's not that my trust level would increase for anything and everything. So whatever comes my way, be it machine, be it any risk taking, or be it the gambling or something that I really like, dancing, partying or something like that. So it's not that my love or my bonding is going to, my connection is going to, or trust is going to build up on anything that comes my way. It is only between 2 human beings. So oxytocin hormone actually builds up the interpersonal relationships. The second study is the role of oxytocin in fidelity. Now, Sheel et al. 2012 showed that oxytocin modulates social distance between men and women. Now, researchers studied 86 heterosexual men. Some of them were single and others were in a stable monogamous relationship. Using a double-blind independent measure design, a researcher administered either oxytocin or a placebo intranasally. Subjects participated in two independent tasks. In the first task, stop distance paradigm, subjects were positioned at one end of their room with their toes on the mark of the floor, while an attractive female experimenter was positioned on the other side of the room. The subject was then required to move slowly towards the female experimenter and stop at a distance that made him feel slightly uncomfortable. Care was taken to assure that the experimenter maintained the same appearance over all the trials. So the results of the experiment in the first task showed that oxytocin stimulated men in a monogamous relationship, but not single ones, to keep a greater distance between themselves and an attractive woman. It was concluded that oxytocin caused men in a relationship to stay away from an attractive woman who was not his partner. So since I already told you what the results are, just to summarize, so if oxytocin is high in a male, for example, then a male is likely to stay away from the attracted women if they are already in a monogamous relationship, but not the single one. So that means you are feeling more loyal towards your partner if your oxytocin levels are high, and you're likely to keep a distance from any other attractive strangers. Then we have a third study, the role of oxytocin in intergroup conflict. Now, there are less obvious effects of oxytocin too. For example, do you think it can play a role in prejudice, discrimination, or maybe even conflict? It turns out it can, but these come as side effects of increased bonding with your own group. So basically, because we have been talking about oxytocin being the love hormone, the cuddle hormone, the kiss and bonding hormone, social bonding hormone. So how it can bring in the conflict? Like I told you, there is a slight disadvantage of oxytocin, that it can bring conflict with those who are not in your in-group. So you are likely to love or cuddle, hug people whom you already love, whom you are in relationship with, but you're likely to stay away from the others. So this can bring in intergroup conflict. So in this study, there were two studies that will look seemingly surprisingly negative effects of oxytocin. The first is by D. Drew et al. 2012, looked at the role of oxytocin in intergroup conflict. So more specifically, defense-motivated non-cooperation. This was a double-blind experiment using the independent measure design. The sample consisted of 102 males and they self-administered either a dose of oxytocin or placebo through nasal spray. Participants were randomly assigned to 3-person groups and told that they would need to compete against another group of 3 people. Following this, each participant was paired with a member of another 3-person group and played a modified version of the prisoner's dilemma. Now, in prisoner's dilemma is probably the most commonly mentioned problem of game theory. Game theory is an interesting interdisciplinary field that combines maths, decision theory, economics and other areas. It is a theory that models the behavior of 2 or more rational agents whose actions and outcomes depend on each other. Things get even more interesting when you compare the rational predictions of the mathematical theory, game theory, to real-life behavior of participants in these situations. So the standard prisoner's dilemma is as follows. 2 members of a criminal gang are arrested. Each person is kept in an isolated chamber and they have no means of communicating with each other. They are interrogated independently and each of them has to choose one of 2 actions. Now they are given the same deal which is presented in the form of matrix of outcomes as shown in the table below. Now if A and B each choose to betray the partner and testify against that person, they are both given 2 years in prison. If A and B both remain silent, they only get 1 year each. If A chooses to testify against B but B keeps silent, A will be free and B will get 3 years in prison, and vice versa. Now that's a very tricky situation. It looks as if the most rational choice in this situation is to remain silent. This minimizes the total time spent in prison. However, the problem is that both A and B have a temptation to testify against the partner and be free. So there is a high chance that the outcome will actually be 2 years in prison for each of them. Now what would you do if you were in this situation in prisoner's dilemma, and what application of game theory in various areas of knowledge can you think of? So in this game, the two participants, so it was clearly seen that, the researchers concluded that oxytocin induced non-cooperation is motivated by the desire to protect vulnerable group members. So this reinforces the role of oxytocin in creating bonds with the members of your group, but also shows how oxytocin has a reverse negative side, defensiveness and non-cooperation with the others. This is a fourth study, the role of oxytocin in human ethnocentrism. Now, Diderot et al. 2011 found that oxytocin promotes human ethnocentrism, a type of intergroup bias where one's own ethnic group is perceived as more important than or superior to others. So, when exaggerated, ethnocentrism may lead to xenophobia. This is not something that oxytocin, the love hormone, the bonding hormone, the cuddle chemical has usually been associated with, but Diderot conducted a series of experiments, all of which was a double-blind, placebo-controlled independent measure designs. So participants in the studies were indigenous Dutch males. They self-administered either oxytocin or a placebo intranasally. Experiments involved exposing subjects to images of people belonging either to their in-group, that is Dutch males, or out-group, that is immigrants from the Middle East and German citizens. Now, experiments used moral choice dilemma tasks such as the famous trolley problem we have already discussed in neurotransmitters and behavior. So, participants in the oxytocin and placebo groups were given a series of moral choice dilemmas where decision had to be made as to whether one person should be killed in order to save 5 other people. For example, hitting the switch that will divert the trolley to another track, killing one individual and saving 5. In some of these tasks, the target person, the one who had to be killed, was a member of participants in group, and in other tasks, a member of their out group. So this was achieved by manipulating the name of the target person, either a typically Dutch name or a typically Arab name or typically German name. So the other 5 individuals were unnamed, and so their identity or ethnic background was not indicated. The question was, in a task like this, would a Dutch person prefer to sacrifice a non-Dutch person, and how does this depend on oxytocin? So results showed that under oxytocin, males were more likely to sacrifice an out-group target than an in-group target. While under the placebo, there was no significant difference. There were 2 alternative explanations for this finding, that oxytocin promotes in-group favoritism and oxytocin promotes out-group derogation. Further analysis of the data revealed that compared with males in the placebo control group, males under oxytocin were less likely to sacrifice a member of their in-group but were not more likely to sacrifice a member of the out-group. And based on this, the first explanation has to be preferred one, that oxytocin creates intergroup bias by increasing in-group favoritism. So we are done with what are hormones and what is oxytocin, how oxytocin affects various behaviors of a human. The second hormone that we are going to do in this lesson is testosterone and the supporting studies thereafter. Testosterone is a hormone that is produced by the endocrine system in both men and women. The majority of the testosterone in males are produced by the testes and the adrenal glands. And in women, it is produced by the ovaries and the adrenal glands. Testosterone serves many functions in our body, such as helping in maintaining reproductive tissues, stimulating sperm production, stimulating and maintaining sexual function, increase muscle mass and strength, maintain bone strength. Of the testosterone is greatly in terms of sexual development when males reach or go through their puberty. And the effect of this testosterone hormone has a great impact on their voices, how deep their voices become, on their muscle mass, on their bones. Roles that we are going to study of testosterone is whether they also play a role in violent and aggressive behavior. Though testosterone is produced by both male as well as females, but it is usually called as male hormone, and it is produced in males 10 times higher than the females. In males, it is produced by testes, and in females, it is produced by ovaries. In a boy fetus, the production of testosterone increases from week 7 to 12 week. This causes primary sexual characteristics, that is genitals. The increase of this period also affects the length of the index finger relative to the fourth finger. Most males have longer fourth finger than index fingers. There is also an increase in secretion of testosterone in male babies during the first months after birth. The function of this is not clear. Some suggest that this increase masculines the brain. During childhood, boys and girls produce similar amount of testosterone. At puberty, the production increases in boys, and this leads to secondary sexual characteristics, that is male body shape, increased muscle mass, and body hair growth. The amount of testosterone decreases with age. Now, sexual characteristics are those behaviors and physical traits that indicate which sex an individual has. Primary sexual characteristics are those traits that are involved in reproduction, for instance, genitals. Secondary sexual characteristics are those traits which are not directly relevant for reproduction, for instance, facial hair, body shape, etc. The release of testosterone also varies with the time of the day. It is highest in the morning and decreases over the day. So also behavior affects the amount of testosterone produced when we are engaged in competitions. The amount of testosterone secreted normally increases. So the behavioral effects of testosterone include increased well-being, competitiveness, dominance, aggression, and sexual behavior. So these are particularly the specific behaviors we are going to study through the supporting studies. That aggression, competitiveness, aggressiveness, all these things are also related. All these kind of behaviors are also related with the production of testosterone in the body. Testosterone has a permissive effect on aggression. It appears that testosterone alone is not necessary for aggressive or violent behavior. The amygdala plays a key role in aggression. The amygdala communicates with the hypothalamus by way of a cable of neurons called the stria terminalis. When the amygdala is aroused, it sends electrical impulses called action potentials down the stria terminalis to the hypothalamus, and this appears to be the way that aggression works. So there are several ways that people can be aggressive. Not all of it is physical. So testosterone also acts as an oxytocin antagonist. Now, testosterone is linked to muscle growth in males and females. Testosterone is an androgen, a male hormone. It is not found exclusively in males, but it is also found in females, but it is in much lower than found in the male population. Testosterone is often linked to aggression, and research has shown link between the hormone aggressive behavior. In humans, the relationship is more complex. The testosterone not being implicated in all aggression, but mainly aggressive reactions to social provocation. To a supporting study which you will be writing for your exams. So first is Baumgartner et al. 2008. This was to study the effect of testosterone on a male's generosity and sense of aggression. Jack wanted to create alpha males to see how they would react in an online trust game. The sample was made up of 25 male students. First, the researchers drew blood from the participants to establish baseline levels of testosterone. Then they had participated rubbing a gel on their shoulders. The participants were randomly allocated to one of two conditions: a prescription testosterone gel or a placebo. The men returned the next morning. Another blood test was done to record the actual increase in levels of testosterone in the participants. The treatment had doubled the amount of testosterone in the experimental condition. Now, then the participants were asked to play the ultimatum game. Each participant in the game was told that he could be generous to another player with money he controlled, or he could be stingy. Stingy offers could be rejected by the other person. Rejected offers caused both men to lose all the money on the virtual table. The study was a double-blind, counterbalanced, repeated measure design. The men returned 4 weeks after 4 weeks later and repeated the procedure, but this time got the other substance or to rub on their shoulders. The participants were 27% stingier when they had received the testosterone gel than when they received the placebo. The findings suggest that men with naturally high testosterone levels would be expected to be more selfish and also more likely to punish others for violations of social norms. When compared to the findings of the Bogmartin study, it appeared that testosterone has the opposite effect of oxytocin, a rise in distrust and an increase in selfish behavior. So the evaluation is that the study was a repeated measure design. That means any individual differences, if there, were all eliminated. So it is like controlling of the extraneous variable. Debriefing showed that the participants were unable to guess when they had received the treatment versus the placebo. There was also no evidence of demand characteristics. Whenever we use a placebo, there is this ethical consideration of deception. This needed to be justified and revealed in debriefing. The study was a counterbalance to show that order effects did not play a role in the results. The study is reductionist in its explanation of human aggression and generosity. The study measured testosterone levels but did not measure activity in the amygdala or hypothalamus. The study allows us to hypothesize that testosterone interferes with oxytocin. The situation is highly artificial and thus has low ecological validity since the levels of testosterone were artificially manipulated and the game was very simplistic. This may not explain the role of testosterone in real life situations. And now the last study is Boss et al. 2010 Testosterone and Trust. So in this study, Boss et al. 2010 created a double-blind repeated measures as a lab experiment with the aim of investigating the role increased testosterone has on interpersonal trust. The procedure was as follows. Participants consisted of 24 young women with a mean age of 20.2 years recruited to the study through opportunity sampling. Saliva samples were taken from all participants to measure baseline testosterone levels. Each participant came to the lab on 2 separate occasions. Each time she was administered with 0.5 mg of testosterone via oral dosage or an oral placebo. The participant and researcher were both blind to whether the pill given was testosterone or a placebo. At each session, the participants engaged in a trustworthiness task. This consisted of viewing grayscale images of faces on a computer screen and requiring the participants to assign a trustworthiness rating to each face. The participants used a cursor to slide an indicator towards their 3 terms: untrustworthy, neutral, or very trustworthy. The cursor could reside in between terms and the software then coded the rating as a number from 100, very untrustworthy, to 100, very trustworthy. The researchers chose this visual assessment task as their aim was to investigate social trust. They believed that we draw conclusions on an individual trustworthiness based on a variety of social factors including appearance. The results were then analyzed using statistical analysis. When the participants were compared as a whole, there was a statistically significant difference in trustworthiness ratings between the placebo and testosterone conditions. Where the researchers separated the participants based on their baseline placebo trustworthiness ratings into either higher trusting or low trusting groups. This difference was shown to be explained by a highly significant difference within the high trusting group. The specific results are shown in the graph below. In discussing their incredibly interesting results, the author did so through an evolutionary lens. They wrote, testosterone increased social vigilance in trusting humans, presumably to better prepare them for the hard-edged competition over status and valued resources. These findings provide insight into the hormonal regulation of human sociality by showing that the hormone testosterone downregulates interpersonal trust in an adaptive manner. In short, Boss et al. 2010 concluded that testosterone plays a causal role in In reducing interpersonal trust among unfamiliar individuals, this is quite the assertion, as it implies that somehow the brains of the highly trusting subjects use testosterone to chemically reduce baseline trust as a defense mechanism. Conversely, when the testosterone was interacting with the low trusting participants, the brains of those participants somehow knew that they had a sufficiently skeptical level of trust and therefore did not use the testosterone to reduce trust any further. So, this conclusion may seem simply designed and had the following strengths. The counterbalance repeated measures designed allowed for comparison of trust change within the same participant and randomized the order of the placebo testosterone condition to minimize confounding variables. The researchers controlled for possible variance in natural testosterone levels due to menstrual cycle. The double-blind procedure reduced participant and researcher bias. Once participants were separated into high-trusting and low-trusting groups, the results were highly significant. It provided the incredibly interesting insight into testosterone selectively down-regulating an interpersonal behavior. But the limitations of the study was that the trustworthiness stars used in the lab experiment had low ecological validity. The rating methodology was somewhat artificial in using a scale rating system with key terms being very untrustworthy, neutral and very trustworthy. For participants could have differing concepts of what trustworthiness is. And the last is that the researchers' assertion that skepticism or low levels of trust are socially advantageous is not clearly supported. So now here we are done with this lesson today. How hormones affect the behavior of a person, what are the types of hormones and what are the kind of behavior that these hormones have an effect on. So with this we also did some supporting studies for testosterone and oxytocin. If you want, you can write some other studies for your exams as well. Subscribe to my channel and see all the lessons of IB Psychology grade 11 and 12, biological approach, research methods, social cultural approach, cognitive approach and grade 12 specialized courses as well.